Hello and welcome to our very first podcast or Blockbrief. My name is Matthew Player, and I am the founder and CEO of Blockbrief. My background is in urban planning and development. This is, as you can see, this is our very first podcast slash video cast. So things will be a little bit rocky to start with as we find our way, and I imagine in the podcast moving forward and the video cast moving forward, things will get a little bit smooth as we get into our groove. The focus of the podcast is really to, on a monthly basis, once a month, get you guys up to date and in the know about the data that's being added to the site and what's been happening in Australia in terms of planning and zoning changes and developments in planning reforms and things like that. We're going to look at it from a macro scale and micro scale. We will be getting guests who are in real estate finance, real estate development finance, urban planning, development, and town planning experts, etc., to give you some more information about things that are going on and answer some of your questions. You will be able to send any questions that if you want us to tackle a particular issue or question, send those questions to info@blockbrief.com. But for this very first episode, we're going to just deal with our bread and butter, which is looking at some of the data and things that have that happened in the last month in March in terms of zoning changes and rezonings. What I want to do is report on our latest report on the macro zoning changes that have happened across Australia. So some of the big, January, February, and February are typically slower months as the local governments and state governments are still getting back into the groove of things after the summer vacation and holidays. And March is where you start to see that pick up in the zoning activity, moving right through from March, April, all the way through to things start to wind down towards October, November, December, although there sometimes is a rush of activity when they want to get things across the line before the Christmas break. But so in March, we had 65 rezoning instrument adoptions across Australia. And when I say instruments, those one instrument might involve one property, or it might involve 1,000 properties. All we're talking about here is that there was a planning scheme amendment or adoption, and there were 65 of those across Australia in March. And from our reporting, we identified at a minimum an increase in capacity of dwellings across the country of 8,398 dwellings. And then those projects also would generate 346 jobs nationally. That's sort of the job figure is a little bit lower than typically anticipated. Sometimes job figures are a little harder to pull out of rezoning information, and dwellings are a little bit more easier to identify. But that's quite a good figure, creating lots of opportunities for investors, developers, lenders, etc. Some good activity there. This capacity, so as always, this is just a stroke of a pen on a paper of a map and changing a color of a map. You still would need, for this capacity to be to realize and enter into the housing supply market or the commercial and retail floor space made available, you're going to have to go through obviously development applications, planning permits, building applications, and then eventually actually construct the buildings and the property or subdivide the lots. And as typical, the staging average, this comes in with the staging average. The estimation here was 3.1 years staging average with a minimum of 0 years and a maximum of 20 years. So that's giving an idea of that take-up rate of when we anticipate that because some of these rezonings are major planning scheme adoptions where, they're looking for this new planning scheme and zoning map to control planning and zoning for the next 15 to 20 years, whereas then you might have a spot rezoning where they're looking for that development to take place, expecting that development to take place in the next 3 years. You can access this data on the Blockbrief news blog. And as you can see, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper now into the various states. As we can see for New South Wales, of those 65 nationally, 24 of those instrument adoptions occurred in New South Wales, providing capacity for up to 917 dwellings and development projects of generating 316 jobs. Queensland, although there was only 3 rezoning instrument adoptions, which is quite common with Queensland, as we anticipate in Queensland. Often they do less spot rezoning and more strategic rezoning. So you'll likely see less activity. But when there is activity, there's significant activity. So as you can see, there's only compared with New South Wales, there's only 3 rezonings that occurred in Queensland. However, they were creating capacity for 851 dwellings. The 2 jobs figure is an estimate, likely higher than that. And then the staging average, and that's how you can get an idea of there's less spot rezoning going on here, because in Queensland, the staging average is much longer. It's an average of 9 years, whereas Australia, it's 2 years. Victoria's zoning activity is a little closer to New South Wales, with 15 rezoning instrument adoptions in March, with creating capacity for 2,910 dwellings. And we're going to dig into some of these rezonings a little bit later with more detail and look at them at the micro level, the specific changes. So 2,910 dwelling capacity for 2,910 dwellings in Victoria, and the project's about 16 jobs. Staging average of 2.66 years, so we're closer to New South Wales there. Western Australia, 21 rezoning instrument adoptions, providing capacity for up to 3,720 dwellings. So WA is creating some opportunities there. Development projects with capacity of jobs, 12 jobs. I'm looking at WA with a staging average of 4 years. ACT had some rezoning instruments, but these were some minor correction zoning changes, so there was no real discernible capacity created as a result of those changes, more about just streamlining and making things a little bit easier. And we had very little activity to no activity in the Northern Territory, South Australia and Tasmania. South Australia, we had a lot of activity back in February and January. We probably expect South Australia to do have a little bit more activity coming in for April, but there was not much activity. South Australia is a little bit hot and cold like that, where it seems to come in. One month there's a lot of activity, and then there can be no activity for a couple of months. So that's your macro report for rezoning adoptions across Australia in March. Look out for next month, where we release this report, which is always available at blog.blockbrief.com. And that's freely available for users just to get a macro idea of what zoning activity has happened in the previous month. If you're a Blockbrief subscriber, you will be getting these zoning changes as they happen, and getting the actual zoning changes, which we're about to delve into now in our next segment. So let's move on now to going through some of these zoning changes. And the purpose of this also, if you're looking at the video screencast rather than the podcast, is to also give our users and also potential users an idea of how to use the Blockbrief system. So if you're on YouTube, great to view this so that you can utilize it for yourself and learn a little bit more about the tools of using the Blockbrief platform. But if you're on the podcast, that's fine. I will be talking you through some of these major zoning changes, and you can understand what has been happening. So first off the rank, we're going to start with Queensland. Some of the, as we said, there was about three. There was some, not a large amount of instrument adoptions, but some major activity here. And we're actually going to start with. We're going into Pacific Paradise in Queensland for our first look at a rezoning. There was some activity. Now, this has been a controversial one. You just need to Google. The name of this project, and you will see we are in Ocean Drive, Pacific Paradise. Is where we're looking at for this Queensland within the Sunshine Coast local government area. This is the Twin Waters sort of land release, which Twin Waters West, which is they finally gave it approval, and this is going to create a subdivision of 849 dwellings. So it's a major change to the area. As I said, this has been quite a controversial one. The local neighbourhood, there has been some action groups against this project trying to slow it down or stop it altogether. But they finally have been given the green light. So the amendment has been made where they're basically rezoning a bunch of rural land. I believe the project is owned. Yes, it's a Stockland project, and you can access all that activity. It's a Stockland project that's going on here. So we're putting in quite a significant amount of lots here. As you can imagine, Stockland is probably going to be released in stages, but in the coming years, you're going to start to see some activity in the Twin Waters area and on the Sunshine Coast in Ocean Drive, Twin Waters. So that was a significant rezoning occurring in Queensland in March. The next one that we're going to talk about is actually an adoption of a new planning scheme in Queensland, and that's I probably will pronounce this wrong, so my apologies for any locals. Goondiwindi, Queensland, has adopted a new planning scheme. So that means that it's an LJ-wide scheme. It is the planning scheme that's going to set out council's intentions for future development in the area for the next 20 years. So this is your new zoning map, your new planning controls, all contained in this new document. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold. As you can see, so we're going to be seeing increasing in housing supply, increased commercial land supply, because they've had to. This is the new planning scheme for the next 20 years. So there's plenty of opportunities here. As our last one, the Twin Waters one, Stockland's already heavily involved there. Now, if you're more the home builder, certainly there's opportunity there with the Stockland one. But this one is more, there's plenty of properties where that are involved, and so if you're not a large developer, etc., you can certainly find some opportunities as a result of this new planning scheme, because obviously they've had to scope out and provide capacity for the area for the next 20 years. So that's the Goondiwindi. I hope I got close to pronouncing that correctly. That's the Goondiwindi new planning scheme that's been adopted. So it's the Goondiwindi planning scheme has been adopted and is now in force. We're going to move on now. That's Queensland wrapped up. We're going to move on now to Western Australia, and I'm going to focus on two new zoning changes that occurred in Western Australia. This one is in Fremantle South. It is South Street, the South Street, Beaconsfield, Western Australia, and this is my understanding is this is a housing authority site. Now although a significant amount of the properties involved in the rezoning are housing authority is a housing authority land. There are properties that are involved that are freehold, that are owned by they're in private ownership. And basically what they've done is where there is open space and and they've increased the density here for these particular properties, so that they can create a capacity of about 456 new dwellings, and that I believe that 456 is including taking away the existing dwelling. So it's your net yield there, and we're seeing an increase in density in this area, and there's 456 dwellings. So a lot of the Beaconsfield Housing Authority site has just been given the green light for a rezoning. This leads you to a PDF document, which is the links here are all PDF documents for our videocast viewers to view. So we've got increased housing supply, commercial land supply. So as you can see, there might be opportunity here for a larger developer. There's opportunity here for real estate brokers and lenders. As I said, there are properties involved in this particular rezoning which are in private ownership, so there may be opportunity there for a smaller time developer and builder to come in and potentially snap up one of those properties that has benefited from increased density in their zoning. So this is the South Street Beaconsfield rezoning that occurred. And it is it's City of Fremantle Local Planning Scheme number 4, and the amendment number was amendment number 72. The next one in WA that we want to talk about is in Mossman Park, and I hope for my videocast viewers, by just searching Mossman Park, I will be able to locate it on the Blockbrief platform, and that may not be the case, but we'll see how we go. Yes, so we're able to locate this one. So the Mossman Park one. Yes. So once again, similar to the Goondiwindi one in Queensland, this one in Mossman Park, the town of Mossman Park, is a totally new planning scheme. The scheme sets out the local government's planning aims, intentions for the scheme area. It's a new zoning map. So there is a wide array of opportunity as a result of this for all potential real estate professionals and investors, developers in the town of Mossman Park in Western Australia. I've clicked on the link that's made available on the Blockbrief platform just to get a little bit more detail. So, once again, similar to Goondiwindi, this planning scheme is going to set out for the next 15, 20 years, 10 years, what sort of development they want to occur in Mossman Park, and where they want the development activity to be. If you go to our Blockbrief website and then Mossman Park website, you can see all the background documentation about what they want trying to achieve, whether high growth, low growth. But there is a new zoning map in force in Mossman Park, Western Australia. So go check that out if that is a area that you have interest in and a market that you're interested in. They have a new planning scheme in force. We're going to move on now to New South Wales. And after New South Wales, we will finalise with Victoria, given that I'm sorry that Victoria is last, guys, but the only reason Victoria is last is most of our audience is Victoria, so they will hang in for the full podcast and screencast to see Victoria. So let's move into New South Wales. And there was a lot of draft and adopted activity in New South Wales. One I am very excited about is in Blacktown and the Mount Druitt area. There is currently a draft scheme involved for both CBDs. So basically what is happening here is, and this is very exciting for those interested in the Blacktown and Mount Druitt areas as a potential investment. This proposal is proposing to rezone. So it's gotten through the gateway stage. So that's the first hurdle in New South Wales, which is very exciting, that it has gotten through the first stage, meaning they haven't just kicked it to the curb. This has got the first stage. So there's a good chance that this will get approved. Basically, the proposal is seeking to rezone land in Blacktown and the Mount Druitt CBDs to B4 mixed use and B3 commercial core, increasing building heights, removing floor space ratio controls, and introducing incentive building heights for these two key gateway sites. So basically, Blacktown Council is saying Mount Druitt and Blacktown CBDs are going to be open for business, and we want developers, investors, lenders to come in and revitalize and develop this area. So, and they've even got projections for Blacktown. They're talking about 4,800 dwellings and hoping that this increased development activity as a result of these rezonings leads to 16,500 jobs in Blacktown. So as you can see, to spur that sort of activity, that is going to need a lot of rezoning for increased development in both Blacktown and Mount Druitt. Mount Druitt, same story as what we just read with Blacktown. So they're looking at 2,800 dwellings and over 15,000 jobs as a result of this rezoning. So this is the project name is the rezoning Blacktown and Mount Druitt CBD. So that is an exciting one for you New South Wales investors and developers, as we have a major mixed-use rezoning being created for Blacktown and Mount Druitt. As you can see, it basically covers every property in that CBD, those CBD areas of the two locations being rezoned. So very exciting stuff there in Blacktown. Let's go more out to a rural setting. Although it's funny you say Mount Druitt, Blacktown, once considered semi-rural, and it's now very much a part of the Sydney Metro, and where most of the growth is expected out those areas. So now we're going to Port Stephens, to Meroe. I hope I didn't get that name of that wrong. So this is a spot rezoning, as you can see, because I have a full address here, and it is a draft rezoning in the Port Stephens local government area, and we can give you some information about this rezoning. So the site has been, I believe it is in draft. So the site has been rezoned from R2 rural landscape zone to R2 low density residential zone. And this is going to facilitate a residential subdivision of at least 300 lots. So the developer in this particular rezoning, so there's a developer involved that has pushed this through. It's Kingston Properties, not a well-known developer, at least as we know. So we have limited knowledge about who that is. But basically, we have a property that has currently traditionally been used for agriculture, now about to be a residential subdivision for 300 lots in the Port Stephens local government area and the town of Meadowy. Sorry if I got that wrong. I'm terrible with some of these names. That is not one of my strong suits. Is suburbs names. Let's move back into actually we'll stay out in these rural greenfield rezonings, and we're going to go to Muswellbrook. I used to do a little bit of work out here, so I should be better at saying that name, but I always struggled with that one. This may be a theme with this podcast, is Matt struggling with suburb names. So we have another semi sort of spot rezoning here, as you can see. Let's grab this particular one. This is on Ironbark Road in Muswellbrook. And it is still in the draft stages. The rezoning of the site, so it's currently an E3 environmental management, so a rural zone, and it is being rezoned to part R1 general residential, a sort of flexible residential zone there that you wouldn't normally anticipate and then also part R5 large lot residential. So the subject land has an area of so we're talking about an 80 hectare site, and they're thinking that there's going to be a potential yield of approximately 600 lots. Wow, beautiful. And this is I guess a part of an existing sort of planned subdivision. The project name is the Ironbark Ridge Extension. And we have this one's being pushed by the owners of the property. The Webbers, the owners of this property, have pushed this rezoning. So traditionally, we now have a site in the Muswellbrook area, going from grazing or livestock land use, and it is going to be a residential subdivision for at least 600 dwellings. We've now gone through some of our more rural rezoning, and we're going to go make our way back via Newcastle and then all the way back to Metro Sydney. So the next rezoning is 11 to 17. Let me check I've got this correct. Yeah, there we go. Mosbury Crescent, The Hill in the Newcastle area. So this is, I believe, a draft in this stage. Let's zoom in a little bit. Actually, it might have been already given the green light. Yes, it has. So let's give you a bit more. I believe this is the Channel 9 site from memory. I believe this is part of land. Some of it is not all theirs. Yes, this is the NBN site rezoning. So some of you may be more familiar. I'm not as familiar. When I first saw this rezoning, I thought, oh, they're doing the block here or something. But this is for you you listeners and users that are more familiar with the NBN, with the Newcastle area, this is the NBN site rezoning. The proposal has, it's a proposal. So the proposal seeks to rezone the site from R2 low density residential to R3 medium density residential zone. The amendment also seeks to increase the maximum. So we've also not just increased the rezonings, we're also going to not just change it to residential and a higher residential, we're also increasing the building height and the FSR. So we're talking about apartments here, at least 208 apartments being made available. The owner is the applicant, and it is the Nine Network of Australia Proprietary Limited involved here. So this traditionally, a lot of this land was a studio or lower density residential, and now we're going to find that we're going to see some higher sort of medium density residential coming in here. I imagine this site is probably going to be snapped up by a sort of medium to larger developer with an interest in a Newcastle area. So that's another exciting rezoning that occurred last month, or proposal that occurred last month. And now we're making our way all the way back to Metro Sydney, and we're going to Macquarie Park in New South Wales. I believe this may not be a straight rezoning. I think it's more of a amendment of planning controls to increase density. Might be a schedule. So let's see what we've got going on with this particular spot rezoning. So we are at 112 Talavera Road, Macquarie Park. And the proposal, the project name is at this stage named after the site, so 1112 Talavera Road, Macquarie Park. And it is a mixed rezoning. They are seeking, now I believe it's not a full rezoning where they're going, R1 to R5. I think they're already comfortable and happy with the zone here. What they're doing is increasing the permitted height and the FSR, so increasing the density. The proposal is expected to enable a mixed-use redevelopment on the site comprising 1,250 dwellings and 1,500 square meters of retail and commercial space. There we are. A big boy involved again. Meriton Group is involved in this particular rezoning. They are the owner of the site. And this one is currently a multi-story office complex. So we're looking probably a business park office area, which Ryde is and Macquarie Park is very well known for. And they want to repurpose that site, which is we're going to see more and more of in the coming years. They're repurposing this site for residential / retail, so more of a mixed use development there. Okay, so that is New South Wales wrapped up for the month. As you can appreciate, there's a lot more rezonings. We can't get through them all in one podcast, but we're just trying to spotlight some of the ones of great interest. We're moving on to Victoria now, and I believe the first one is in Shepparton, Victoria. And let's see if we can find the one that we are looking for. Nope, it can't be that one. Sorry for those listening on the podcast. Just trying to find the rezoning that we're talking about here. And I am coming up with rezonings that all 2017. We might have to move on from the Shepparton one, or I might go back, see if we can find it in the map. So we're talking about rezoning in Greater Shepparton in Victoria. This is a major rezoning. I believe it is to the rezone. The purpose of the rezoning is to implement the Shepparton Northeast Precinct Structure Plan. So it's proposing major changes to facilitate the development of land within the Shepparton Northeast Precinct in accordance with the vision set out in the structure plan, rezoning much of the land for urban growth zone, and it's expected that the precinct can generate up to 218 employment opportunities and 15,000 dwellings. So 1,500 dwellings. So that's a major rezoning going on in Greater Shepparton, being pushed by the state government. So staging anticipation of about 10 years. So what you're seeing here is a rezoning with lots of opportunities. There's no major developer pushing this at the sort of just looking at it briefly. So lots of opportunities there for developers interested in the Greater Shepparton area. Another major rezoning is in, I believe, Knox. In the Knox LGA. This is more a commercial rezoning, and this is once again the project is called the Future Proofing Knox Business Land Project, and I think so the purpose is to implement the Future Proofing Knox Business Land Project. The amendment seeks to support the well-being of the Knox community, the local economy, and local jobs by ensuring that the city provides support and sufficient amount and type of mix of business land. So lots of rezoning to make sure that there's plenty of commercial land for the next 20 years to accommodate the growing needs of the local economy there in the Knox LGA. And as a result, they anticipate that it's creating projects and development activity that will generate 10,000 jobs. So another bunch of opportunity there in Victoria in Knox LGA, in this time for commercial development. Moving on, we're going to move to the couple we're going to jump off straight away that happened recently. There was some controversial zoning changes have occurred in Victoria. I believe they've been a topic of news there in Victoria recently. Across the area in Banyule, Moreland, Bayside, and Melbourne itself. Let me find these particular rezonings. And most of these rezonings, my understanding is that they are previously housing authority land. I believe this is one of them. So in Moreland, so they're sort of social and public housing sites. So this one in Moreland is the Moreland. No, that's not the correct one I'm looking at. Maybe let's just go by council. For those of you viewing at home, I'm just going through the zoning changes tab to find these particular rezonings that I wish to talk about. So let's see. I doubt it'd be the 4,000 one. It's more likely to be 200. So yes, this is the Gron Place Public Housing Estate in Brunswick West. So the site is Kitchener Street, Brunswick. And it rezones much of their land to mixed use. And the anticipation is that there's going to be 200 dwellings and some jobs created. Up to 208 dwellings are going to be accommodated. I believe the net would be 200 dwellings. So that's a public housing site that is being rezoned. I believe much of these public housing sites are going to be sold off to developers. Another one is I believe there's two in Banyule. And they're in the same area, I believe, in Heidelberg West and Heidelberg. And I believe they're going to be sold off to developers with the understanding that a percentage of the finished product will be made available for public housing, and then the rest of the development would be available for private apartments, or whether it's commercial. So we've got a site here. Got a site here in Heidelberg and Heidelberg West. So I believe the Heidelberg West site is the project name for it is the Tarakan Public Housing Estate is proposed to be. It has been rezoned to make way for more a redevelopment for a renewed public housing and even some private development. And then close by in Heidelberg, they have done the Belbarda Public Housing Estate has also been rezoned for mixed use development, and they anticipate the net will be 365 dwellings, so with a percentage of those being still public housing and some private housing. We had a similar instance in North Melbourne. And let in find the project in North Melbourne. I believe this is it. Now, this one isn't necessarily a public housing one. I believe the one in North Melbourne is the Q Street. No, that's not the one I'm looking for. Yes, this is it. 12 Hardwick Street, North Melbourne. I believe this is a public housing one. It's the Abbotsford Street Public Housing Estate. Once again, same situation. Rezoned for residential growth. The amendment facilitates renewal of the housing estate. I believe, once again, it's probably going to be some private housing involved here and some public, at least a net of yield of 330 dwellings involved here. And so there are a couple more like that. I believe in Brighton we have a similar situation at 540 New Street, Brighton. I think this is a similar situation where we have a public housing Let's see if we can find it quicker for our listening audience. So yes, Bayside. Here it is at Bayside. So it is The New Street public housing estate, once again, has been rezoned for residential growth. The rezoning will facilitate redevelopment of the New Street site, which has 107 public housing units, with new buildings containing 140 public housing units and 300 private dwellings. So a slight increase there in public housing, I believe, but it's new stock, so they get to rejuvenate the public housing stock there with some new better facilities, and by way they also get to finance it with making it available for a developer to develop 300 private dwellings. So that's a lot of the activity that occurred in Victoria. We've got some sort of major, in Greater Shepparton and in the Knox LGA, we've got some major structure plans being implemented through rezonings, and then some of the other ones are sort of spot rezonings of some older public housing stock being made available for private development to fund public housing development. So that is our podcast for today. First podcast, let me know what you think. As I said, the purpose of it is to let you guys know what's going on with rezoning at a micro and a macro level. We'll also be dealing with planning reforms in the future. We'll be having guests coming on. The other part is, especially with the screencast version of the podcast, is to also take our users through the site so they can get more comfortable and see all the new data being added to the site, and also see the features to surf through and utilize the site better. As you said, if you have any questions you'd like me to tackle, any specific issues, any questions are like, what is a downloading? What is FSR? How do I lodging a DA or planning permit? We're going to be bringing on guests, experts. As you see, I've done a lot of this stuff myself, so ask me specific questions. I'm particularly an expert in zoning and getting rezonings achieved and looking out for the next rezoning area. So fire your questions to info@blockbrief.com. That's info at blockbrief.com. Put in the subject post, and we will do our best to tackle all those questions that you have, and give us some feedback as well on the podcast. Thank you very much. It was a good start to the podcast, and I hope, and we'll be doing this once a month. We'll be doing this once a month, and you'll hopefully get a good understanding of planning and development and rezoning, etc., etc., etc. And as I said, any questions, go to info@blockbrief.com, and we will go through them. Some of the guests that we think we'll be having on, as I said, I believe we'll be having Tom Burton on from Shore Financial soon. He is an expert in property development lending, and he'll be able to take us through some of the best things to deal with in obtaining financing for your development, pitfalls, things to look out for, etc., etc. So that should be a good podcast that you will not want to miss. I'm excited to have Tom on soon, Tom Burton from Shore Financial. And with that, I will let Drake take it away.